A new climate change report has just been released, and this is one of the most important reports on climate change published ever. This is the IPCC AR6 WGII, and just in case you're not used to thinking in climate change code, I can break down what all of that means. So the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is their 6th major report. That's what the AR6 is all about, and this is the second part of it. That's the WGII part of it. And I know all of this is probably sounding more convoluted than a spin-off from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but bear with me, it's all gonna make sense soon. Wow, that's actually the second dig I've made at superhero movies in my last 2 videos. I guess I just really miss the days of Michael Keaton. The important thing to know about this report is it's all about how climate change impacts humans and impacts the natural world, and how we all can and can't adapt to those impacts. This is the most important report on this topic, well, since the IPCC's last report on this topic, which was a full 8 years ago. And this topic is so important because it's all about why climate change matters in the first place, namely because of how it affects us. By the way, I made a whole other video about what the IPCC is, how it works, and why its reports are so valuable. You can check that out up here. It's well worth a watch, if I say so myself. But let's just do a quick breakdown of what this report is and what this report isn't. This report is a huge summary of all the research going on into climate change impacts and climate change adaptation. This report, though, is not new research by itself. This report is authored by hundreds of academics from around the world. However, these academics are not actually paid for their time authoring this report. This report is approved by the governments of the world, and while they can tweak the wording, especially in the summary for policymakers, they can't just make stuff up and add random points. Every bit of the report is fundamentally based on academic research. This report will be used as the backbone to climate change negotiations, as well as being fundamentally important to climate change planning and climate change policy. However, this report is not the latest installment in the Twilight Saga, and honestly, I don't know where you got the idea that it was. Okay, so enough breaking down what the significance of this report is and all the efforts which went into making it. Let's actually talk about the contents of this report. And full disclaimer, the contents of this report are pretty bleak. So if you're watching this video like this, oh my god, I want you to take a deep breath, because there is light at the end of this video. The report starts out by talking about the impacts of climate change, and one of the first points it draws out is the fact that the extreme weather events that we know climate change is making worse are already impacting humans. As the report puts it, human-induced climate change, including more frequent and intense extreme events, has caused widespread and adverse impacts and related losses and damages to nature and people. The report really emphasises that although climate change affects everyone, climate change does not affect everyone equally. As the report puts it, the impact of climate change differs substantially among and within regions, and there are a couple of things to really pay attention to here. The first is that climate change does not somehow sit above and separately to the messiness of the human world. Climate change interacts with that messiness, exacerbating it and making it that much messier. The second thing to point out is that this is in the present tense. We're not talking about some future problem or some hypothetical problem. Climate change is already exacerbating the inequalities of our world today. Now, the report also points out that the hotter things get, the worse this all gets. Basically, every bit of global warming costs us, and if we don't act here and now, then that's going to be a world of damage in the future. But flipping that around, every action we can take here and now will help protect us, both now and in the future. One thing I found incredibly interesting and incredibly valuable that's mentioned in this report is the mental health impacts of climate change. All too often when we talk about climate change, we talk about its physical impacts, both its impacts on the physical world and on our physical health. But climate change does indeed make us anxious and make us sad as the world around us changes. That's something that I know I've personally experienced, and I know that many of you have too. It's not necessarily news, but I'm extremely relieved that this incredibly important report is bringing light to this issue. Okay, let's talk about adaptation. Adaptation is how we can try and live as best as possible with the changes that take place. Both humans and the natural world can and are adapting to climate change, but there are limits to how far and how fast we can adapt, and in some cases we're already approaching these limits. At the moment, a lot of these limits are financial limits. In other words, there are people and natural systems in the world that could, in theory, adapt to the changes they're facing, but can't because we're not supporting those areas enough. But there's also a serious danger of what the report calls hard limits. These are limits to how far we can adapt, even with the best will and best resources in the world. And some natural systems are already approaching or have already approached these hard limits. So, for example, warm water coral reefs, some coastal wetlands, some rainforests, and some polar and mountain ecosystems. But there are also people around the world who will all too soon face hard limits like these. As the report points out, above 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming level, limited freshwater resources pose potential hard limits for small islands and for regions dependent on glacier and snow melt. So what will we do when people in parts of the world start to reach these hard limits? This is a question that we can't wait to ask, let alone to answer. The report also points out that we could risk effectively adapting to climate change wrong, effectively building up our defences in ways that end up costing us even more. It's a bit like when you've been on loads of rubbish dates and then you don't even bother putting yourself out there anymore, even though you do have loads to offer. I mean, you have a climate change YouTube channel, for goodness sake. Surely someone out there is interested in that. So basically the report is saying we need to think carefully about how we adapt. The report also talks about climate-resilient development, effectively how we can build a better world that also doesn't exacerbate climate change and helps protect us from climate change. And when I say we and us, I really do mean we and us. Listen to how the report phrases it. It says that climate-resilient development happens by working with communities, civil society, educational bodies, scientific and other institutions, media, investors, and businesses, and by developing partnerships with traditionally marginalized groups, including women, youth, indigenous peoples, local communities, and ethnic minorities. So really, this is the most important climate change report ever written, saying that you have a crucial part to play in building a better future. The last quote that I want to mention from this report is weirdly similar to one of the first quotes from the report which came out late last year. This report, which came out just now, says, "It is unequivocal that climate change has already disrupted human and natural systems." It's hard to emphasize just how striking this language is. Unequivocal. And again, that present tense. Climate change is not in the future. Climate change is not hypothetical. It's already disrupted the human and the natural world. So, look, that was a lot to take in. And look, I know that this report is full of doom and gloom. There are going to be countless voices, including in your own head, saying, "That's it, game over." And it's tempting to give into those voices because those voices are asking you to give up. But it's important to remember that those voices are liars. Every part of the report emphasises that what we choose to do today has profound impact on the world we're living in the future. And look, yes, the impacts of climate change that are here today are scary, and yes, they're going to get scarier. But we have the power to protect ourselves from climate change, both by limiting it as much as we possibly can, and by adapting to it as well as we possibly can. And look, I'm not saying that everything's fine or that everything will be fine. Unfortunately, that's simply not true. But it's also not true to say everything's screwed when there's still so much to fight for. Also, it's vital that we remember that this is just part 2 of a 3-part report, and the middle episode of any trilogy is always the depressing one where someone loses a hand. Seriously, this report is all about how climate change impacts us and the natural world. Of course it makes us feel rubbish. It doesn't discuss how we actually stop climate change from happening. That's discussed in the 3rd part of the report, which is due out later this year, but spoiler alert, we need to stop emitting carbon dioxide, and we need to do that as quickly as possible. Finally, I want to emphasise that these have just been my personal takeaways from this report. There's simply not time to talk about everything that it covers, and so I'm putting links in the description to this video so you can read the report itself or other summaries of it. Plus, I'm putting together a playlist with videos from other climate change YouTubers all about their takeaways from the report. You can check that out, I think, over here somewhere. Climate change is already here, and climate change is already hurting us. But we still have a huge amount of choice about what the future will look like. Let's choose a beautiful future, together. Okay, until next time. Bye.